All right, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about server-side tagging and why we believe clients should start now. Just a few housekeeping items. I'll introduce myself. I'm Brian Lamb. I've been with InfoTrust for 6 years now. Our senior analytics architect. I oversee all our standards and best practices across the digital analytics platforms that we support. And then I have with me Jordy.
Hi, my name is Jordy. I've been with InfoTrust for just under 2 years now. And I'm a data engineer, and I have a background in data quality and data pros.
Thank you. And then just a little bit about InfoTrust. We're an analytics consulting and technology agency. We also cover data governance. We have offices across the world. And we're certified on and provide support for a number of platforms, including the Google Marketing Platform and the Google Cloud Platform. We regularly conduct a number of education sessions on various topics, similar to what we're doing today. So again, as I was saying today, we're going to be talking about server-side tagging and why you should consider it now. One thing to note, we will be largely talking about Google's new server-side GTM, but what we're talking about in general applies to any server-side tagging platform. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jordy to provide an overview of server-side tagging.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brian. Now, traditional web tag management is what we're mostly familiar with, right? We're downloading SDKs from a variety of different sources. They're running, usually handling them through a tag manager, and they will be running on the browser, collecting any data that they can get hold of and carting it off to the different endpoints where this data will be put to good use, such as Google Analytics, Facebook, or any other first or third-party endpoints. However, with the server-side tag manager approach, things are very similar but slightly different. So we're still preparing the data in the Google tag in the tag manager. But instead of loading different SDKs from different places, we're sending that data to a server-side endpoint, to a single endpoint, where that data is then processed, prepared, and sent off from the server to the different endpoints. The difference is, instead of being managed directly or running directly in the browser, the data is carted off to a backend service, which is then responsible for moving that data somewhere else. Now, in the case of server-side GTM, the internals to this service are handled by clients, which are essentially the component that's responsible for receiving a data request and deciding whether it's going to accept it or not, and especially its responsibility is to claim that request so that it can treat the data and make it available to the tags. There is a very strong focus on the data model, obviously, because the data needs to be packaged in a way that's going to be understood, first by the client and then by the different tags. So it's very important to have a comprehensive data event model. We're going to be storing that data in variables. This is not different to general tag management, where the data is stored in variables for its use. And then we're going to have the tags who are going to be responsible from reading the information that's provided by the clients and shipping it off to wherever it needs to be shipped off. So in the most common case, a Google Analytics client will be handing off information to a Google Analytics tag, which in turn will be communicating with Google Analytics in order to deliver that data. Since server-side GTM is quite a new product, its current state is that it's still in beta. So the functionality is still very much experimental. but it already provides some very, very nice features and some very promising features at that. There's very, very little built-in functionality as of now. Merely it's just the Google, as I said before, the Google Analytics clients and the Google Analytics tags, which leaves everything very much pre-packaged for you to simply do a very default integration of just enabling the client, enabling the tag, and the data will just flow naturally with very little adjustment. There's also support for the Facebook Conversions API tag, which is a very, very nice feature to have included. And in the community, there are more and more functionalities, or more and more clients, and more tags that are slowly being added, or are being made available, so that you can integrate them into your container. And of course, there's nothing stopping you from creating your own clients, creating your own tags, so that you can create custom HTTP requests, be it to GCP or to any other cloud services, so that you can control your data and send it off to wherever it is needed. I think back to you, Brian.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. So certainly as we start talking about this, there's a number of different ways that people can envision seeing or deploying server-side tagging, and what can it do for you and your business. There's a number of things that it can do now, and then there's a number of things that it will be able to do in the future. Starting with what it can do now, one of the big use cases that we found with a lot of our clients is the ability to start enhancing or increasing durability of data collection. As a lot of people are probably aware, there have been a number of problems with things such as ad blocking technologies. Some of the things that are starting to change with the durability of or the existence of third-party cookies, or the durability of first-party cookies. So from a durability perspective, one of the things that server-side tagging platforms can gain you is being able to run your data under a first-party domain. If we take Google Analytics as an example of this, normally client-side, when you're sending a GA hit, you're sending it to googleanalytics.com. That's a very common domain that's very easy to be identified and blocked. But in moving to a server-side tagging system such as ServerSide GTM, that data is now going to, as we've got in this example, sgtm.example.com, which would be another subdomain running under our website of example.com. Then from there, server-side GTM is actually sending it off to googleanalytics.com for collection. So in this respect, it's more difficult or more unlikely that ad blocker technologies are going to be blocking this information, because it's a subdomain of your website, and it's more likely to be looked on as a functional aspect of what's going on, and not necessarily a marketing or analytics perspective. The second part for the durability is the ability to set server-side cookies. With server-side GTM, when you are making network calls to it, there is a client response back, and with that, you have the ability to set server-side cookies. Historically, most marketing and analytics platforms are deployed with tags and pixels on the client side, and they're setting the cookies client side using JavaScript. This is an area where, when you start hearing things like Safari ITP and some of the changes and restrictions and controls on setting cookies, this is where that policy is getting applied to restrict the ability to set, or the duration of the of cookies that are set client side. To date, right now, nothing of what Safari ITP does looks at cookies that are being set server side. So for platforms that are able to do so, Google Analytics being one of them, we have the ability to set the client ID for Google Analytics as a server set cookie rather than a client set cookie. And that makes it more durable and less likely that things like ITP are going to alter or change the existence of those cookies, and more importantly, the expiration date of those cookies. Another aspect that server-side tagging provides you is the increased ability for data governance. With this, tags can only use the data that you've exposed within your client. It's a little bit easier to receive and filter out sensitive information, such as personally identifiable information. But in addition, there's some things that historically on the client side, you honestly can't control sending to platforms, such as the client IP address, the user agent. Those are inherently in all network calls that come from the browser. But with these calls being sent from the server, you can optionally control whether those platforms receive that type of information. The other aspect of it is to be able to build out custom data sets and ensure that each platform is receiving only the data that you want it to receive, and it needs to receive based on your relationship with that vendor. And then lastly, there's data enrichment. And this is the ability to add information that add to the information you're receiving from the client side with data that you have in your backend server systems. An example of this is that typically with Google Analytics and retail, when we're trying to send that a person viewed a product, we're having to send the product ID along with the name, the category, the price. All that requires, one, that we have that data available on the client side. We've made it available in a way that it can be consumed. And then also when we're sending it to Google Analytics, that makes the network call to send that information just a little bit larger to be able to package that all up. With server-side tagging, we can potentially envision a future where when we're generating things, we're more concerned with, okay, what did they do? They viewed the product. Which product was it? Here's the product ID. And then server side, we can add in from that things such as name, category, brand, price, and combine that and then send it off to Google Analytics. So it does potentially allow for either reducing the size of network calls that have to happen from the client side and or adding information that may be more difficult to make available client side, but you do want to send it to the platforms that you're sending information to. And so those are the things that you can do now with this. When we start talking about what we can do long-term, one of the advantages as we start to be able to move more and more of what we're doing into a server-side tagging platform is a more unified data collection. Currently, right now, for a lot of our clients that are using some sort of client-side tagging system, there is a good chance that they're using a common data layer to do things, but there still can be some variation in how we're going about that and ensuring that everything is getting the same information that it needs. With the move to a server-side tagging system, it becomes a little bit easier to unify that data collection, especially when we start talking about collecting data for both websites and mobile apps. Because those are two different platforms, you can increasingly find that the data that you're making available is different on the different platforms. But with this, you have your own data model, you have your own data set, and it's better and more likely that everything is receiving the same information at the same rate. And then this is the big one. I know a lot of clients are looking at server-side tagging platforms and thinking, I want to move all my client-side tagging to server-side tagging, eliminate them on the client side, and really increase my page performance. Certainly, increasingly, that has effect on things like organic traffic and SEO. Unfortunately, right now, as the platforms exist, there isn't much of an advantage to be able to move client-side tagging to the server side. There's a number of reasons for that. One, right now, a number of platforms still rely on third-party cookies. Also, additionally, there's a number of platforms that have not pivoted their technology yet to the point where it can actually run server side. But as everything progresses in this world, and there are a lot of platforms that are working on moving away from the need for third-party cookies. Google is one of those companies that's doing that. The ability or the need for client-side tagging will be reduced. So there is a future where, as you're deploying this, you'll be able to start assessing what can be moved or eliminated from the client side and moved permanently to the server side. I would also call out, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where everything you have client side will be able to move server side. There are some technologies such as personalization and A/B testing, session recording. Those types of tools for what they do would be very difficult to move to server-side tagging. But a lot of your marketing, remarketing efforts, I do think there will be opportunities down the line to be able to move those either mostly or completely to server-side tagging in the future. And so with that, just want to go over briefly what it looks like, what it takes, what are the requirements in order to start deploying a server-side tagging platform like ServerSide GTM. And I'm going to hand it over to Jordy. You're on mute. Jordy.
I'm very sorry. Thank you very much, Brian. So obviously one of the first, one of the most obvious benefits of starting now is you immediately start to increase the quality and control over your data. As Brian was mentioning, being able to use a first-party domain means your data is less likely to be blocked, and you are going to be able to move from a model where you're allowing third parties to just grab data to a model where you're actually sharing data you already own with them. You will be learning what it takes to set up. What are the bottlenecks? What are the problems? What are the advantages that you gain from moving to a server-side collection model? What are things that you can realistically move, and what are things that you realistically need to wait for a while before you move them? And you will be building a foundation in order to be able to take advantage of any new features as they come along. As we said earlier, it's still in beta, so there's a lot of functionality that is still to come, and you will be in an advantaged position in order to take advantage of those things. And if you have any doubts, we have prepared a checklist which you will be able to access through this link, and it will be made available to you in order to see if you're ready to deploy to ServerSide GTM. So let's assume that you would like to get started and you want to get cracking, which is a very good thing to do. First thing you will need is a Google Cloud billing account. Essentially, what Google is providing you with ServerSide GTM is an App Engine instance that has been fine-tuned for this purpose. And this is something that Google provides you automatically. It's not difficult to get set up, but you will need a billing account because, you know, Google will want to get paid. And also another very important thing is to prepare a subdomain for those to collect that data, to map to this to your new instance, so that you can take advantage of all the benefits of tracking in a first party manner, right? Because then all the requests will be going to your domain, so you'll be able to read your own cookies, you'll be able to manage your own requests, and you will be able to send data to your own domain, which is very important in order to guarantee data durability. From a more practical point of view, because not everything is just technical and implementing a tag and configuring things in Google Cloud, there are some practical issues that need to be considered. The first one is that you're essentially adding a new piece to your data analytics stack. So you need to make sure that you have strategies in place to guarantee that all your variables and tags are going to be unified. There's not going to be any discrepancies. In other words, make sure things don't get made a mess quickly. And also, since you will be running tags in two different spaces or two different places, you need to make sure that there cannot be confusion, and tags and data requests that are already being triggered server-side could potentially be set up on the client side as well by mistake, and therefore generate data duplication. So you want to make sure you have a governance model that makes sure that everybody knows where things need to go. Of course, you're going to need to standardize data structure, which is already part of the GA4 approach. But you want to make sure you have a good data model that's standard, that's accepted by all your stakeholders, and that is ready to support this kind of setup. Now, as a kind of summary of everything that we've been considering, there's the possibility of a server-side GTM pilot implementation project, the outcome of which is essentially to set it up and see what it can do for you. As we know, the first-party data collection is a big improvement in your stacks. It's going to not dramatically, but it's greatly going to improve the data of your quality. It's going to improve which events don't get filtered out, and it's going to improve the lifetime of the user identities, creating a much more realistic user journey that you will be able to understand with greater detail. You're going to be able to gain extra control over that data, and you will be able to create custom data pipelines and data sets if that is what you need, with very little code. With ServerSide GTM, it's very simple to send data to different data sets with curated content. When should you use server-side GTM? Well, if Google Analytics is one of your main sources of truth, or is your source of truth, as we mentioned, the quality of the data is going to improve greatly, so it is highly recommended. And the default case is very, very simple to set up. Another important use case is if you have custom data sets that need to be populated in real time. This is also a very good use case for server-side tagging. If you're using services such as machine learning for personalization, etc., the fact that you can personalize, or that you can adjust the response to any request, that adds a perk. That means you could have instant responsiveness to if a user changes a segment or one of those things. That's a very, very nice feature you can take advantage of. If the majority of your tags can be moved server-side, in other words, if they do not need interaction with the UI, those tags can be moved back, and therefore you can lighten the load on browsers and mobile applications, which is always something that's going to make your customers a lot happier if you're not throttling their network and their battery. And of course, being able to move to Facebook, all Facebook conversions to the conversion API with all the benefits that come with that. Now, a couple of considerations that we have touched upon is that not all the tags can be moved, and it's important to realistically know that not all tags can, especially those that need to interact with the UI, and that's fine. The user is interacting with the UI, and there are things that need to happen with the UI. That data may be able to be sent to the server side for treatment, but the functionality needs to remain in the front end. So not all tags can be moved, and of course, InfoTrust can lend you a hand if you need engineering support. We have also prepared a list of additional resources that you can access. These will be made available to you via the slides, so feel free to dive in. There's lots of very, very yummy information in there, and I think that's all I have.
Yeah, thank you, Jordy. And we have had a few questions that I'd like to be able to cover. Todd asked, are there any concerns with a move to server causing server load issues versus client browser page load impacts? That is going to be platform dependent. Certainly, whatever server-side platform you're looking at using, you will need to ensure that it is set up to be able to handle the load of incoming network requests coming from the client browser. In the case of server-side GTM, depending upon the method that you're using, it utilizes, by default, it uses the App Engine in Google Cloud. And so what you would be doing in that is ensuring that you have enough instances of App Engines available in order to process the incoming load for those network calls. Another question, Nick asked in the Q&A, asked if there's an advantage. You mentioned that the advantage of server-side tagging is that the web and app data can be sent through a unified stream of data. Does this mean that technologies like SDKs won't be necessary for marketing performance measurement? Possibly. If those platforms start providing ways for us to give them information and what they need without requiring an SDK on the website or in the app, then the answer is yes. An example of this is Facebook moving to using their conversion API, CAPI, to be able to send conversion events server-side. So that's one example where now, full honesty, with Facebook right now, you still need the pixel for remarketing on the client side, but that's an example of where technologies are starting to move, where the need for an SDK on the user device may no longer be necessary. Another question we had, what is the quickest way to move all client-side Google Analytics tags to server-side container? So right now, as it stands, you don't actually move the tags from the client side to the server side. What actually happens, Google has added a field to Universal Analytics and GA4 tags within the client side to set a transport URL. That transport URL actually ends up being the endpoint for your server-side GTM, which redirects the network calls from Google Analytics to your server-side instance to then be sent to Google Analytics. So from that perspective, once you have the server-side GTM set up, the change on the client side is actually kind of minor because you keep your existing tagging. You're just updating the setting or settings, depending upon whether you're using a settings variable, to redirect those calls to your server-side instance of GTM. The second question was, should client and server-side container communicate via GA4 protocol or measurement protocol? It would be GA4 protocol at this time. For GA4, there is a measurement protocol. It is in an alpha state, as I understand right now. But even long-term, as it's built right now, Google is built to operate around GA4 as a bit of a, I'll say, an event stream to send information from the client side to the server side for server-side GTM. And then the third question, do we ever want to use a custom image tag to communicate with server-side container? You technically could, if you wanted that as a data point. I would say more likely, if there are vendors that have custom image tags to be able to receive information, those are potentially prime candidates to actually move that tag from the client side to the server side. Assuming that you have the data necessary on the server side GTM, you could replicate that image tag server side fairly easy. One example of that is commission junction. I have one client that has moved their conversion for commission junction from the client side to the server side because it only requires an image tag. Another question we had, can you give an example of a tag that cannot be moved? Yes, currently right now, examples of tags, well, any tag that requires a client-side SDK and does not have a server-side endpoint right now cannot be moved. As I gave an example, Facebook, you can move conversions to server side. Right now, Facebook has not provided a way to move their remarketing pixel server side. Long term, platforms such as A/B testing tools will most likely not get moved server side. Personalization will most likely not get moved server side, and session recording or heat map technologies would most likely not get moved server side. Another question we had, what is the estimated cost of GCP to have a server-side GTM working on a middle-sized website? That is a hard question to answer. Right now, Google recommends having a minimum of 3 app engines in the default configuration, which nets out at about $120 a month. Scaling from that, we're still starting to learn from deployments what that starts to look like. So it's a little bit hard to say, but the minimum cost from what we're seeing is $120 a month for a website. Another question, is server-side tagging also usable on AMP? To my knowledge right now, it is not. Universal Analytics, I don't think for AMP supports transport URL. I know right now GA4 is not supported on AMP, so that isn't really an option. And then another question, from these new containers on GCP are integrations with other native products of GCP, for example, BigQuery, is available. Yes, because it's running on Google Cloud, anything that's within Google Cloud would be accessible within that container and within that infrastructure. Jordy, I'd actually pass this over to you because I know you've had a little bit of experience with this.
Yes, in fact, the API, so the sandboxed API that Google provides for server-side GTM includes 2 calls that connect to services automatically. One is for Google Analytics and the other one is for BigQuery. So it's in fact very, very simple to connect any data coming in to send it directly to BigQuery. And it's part of why I recommended that one of the main use cases be if you need to actually send data to BigQuery and create custom data sets. So that is very much one of the main objectives or one of the main use cases for server-side tagging and server-side GTM specifically. This does not mean that you can't send data to other cloud services. Of course you can. It's just a simple HTTP request, which is possible. But in the case of BigQuery, Google actually provides you with a specific API call.
Thank you. And then I know we're over a few minutes, but we have one last question. What is the migration process for app tracking if you want to move to server-side GTM and are currently on Firebase GA4? Is it similar to web where you want to update the endpoint for the original Firebase hit? Unfortunately, right now, Firebase does not support transport URL for server-side GTM. Us and a number of other vendors agencies have talked to Google about this and mentioned this as a use case need. I do believe it is somewhere on a roadmap, but it's not available at this time. With that, I think we have answered all the questions that were provided. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining today. I hope this has been informative. And if you do have any follow-up questions or want to have follow-up conversations with us and how we can help you with server-side tagging, I would encourage everyone to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to have those conversations and discussions. But with that, thanks everyone, and have a good day.